Kia ora, warm greetings to you all. Welcome to our very first series of the Settling Well Winter Series 2025. So in the next few weeks, we'll be recording and posting episodes featuring guests to tackle topics such as finances, housing, health, education, and more. And just to learn from experts, our awesome guests will be sharing their expertise, lived experiences, and their knowledge to just empower us all. Whether you're new to Aotearoa or you've been here a while, these sessions are something for you to take away and put in your kitty. To kick us off, our first guest is Michelle Mudawarima. Michelle is the director and co-founder of Money Savvy Moves, and today she'll be talking to us about something that we avoid talking about, but that we should really be talking about, which is money. So welcome to Michelle. Welcome to our very first session.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm super excited. And I think it's also just like a privilege being like a first guest. So the bar is low for me because essentially I'm creating it. But yeah, I'm super excited. So just a little bit about myself. So as Petunia has introduced me, that has to actually be the first time somebody has introduced me as the director and co-founder of Money Savvy Move. I read it, but it just hits different when somebody says it.
Yeah, every
So,
day.
yeah. So I'm a chartered accountant. I was born in Zimbabwe and grew up in Taupo, New Zealand, and studied at Victoria University. And I guess something quite key about me is that ever since I was a kid, like my first business was at 8 years old,
Wow.
selling flowers from my
Wow.
grandma's garden. And by like 15, I was doing payroll and like my parents' cleaning business. So that was like my tester to do accounting. And also back in those days, everything was on Trade Me. So I actually got my dad's Trade Me account and I would buy things from eBay and AliExpress overseas and I'd resell.
Hmm.
Well, still studying and doing lots of other stuff. So just
That's it.
thinking about me has always been ingrained in what
Wow.
makes me me.
That actually makes a lot of sense because you and I have had various conversations offline since you've been really like a key part of the Sisonke Charitable African community, helping us with all of our financials and reporting and all of that. And it makes sense that you started at such a young age because you have a way of making money matters simple. Because honestly, like I said, it's a topic that we often avoid because we can't understand, which is really important to understand. But you have this gift of making it interesting, as well as very empowering. So it makes sense that it's something that you kind of started at a very young age.
I did. Started it very young because I think like as much as people don't want to talk about money, it literally drives the behaviors, it kind of drives like how you interact with your partner, your spouse, how you interact with your friends, like family and etc. So I think that like as much as it's easy to ignore it, it's it's one of those things where it's ignore and be oblivious or actually be more in control because that's probably one area in life where you do have a little bit of control,
Mhm.
unlike health and stuff like that, which are a bit more complex. With money, I think if you sort of take the time to understand it, understand what it means to each individual, it
Mhm.
can really it can really make it a simple topic.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, no, and like you said, it's something that kind of like affects us all. And when you say that, it's something that you can sort of like have an element of control over. It leads perfectly into a perfect sequence for my first question, actually, which is what are the first steps to kind of like take control of our finances?
So this is my own personal favorite one, and it's just doing a stock take. So I come from an external auditing background, so where you don't accept things at face value. So if you look at a financial statement for a company and their profit margins are really, really low, you don't just go like, okay. You dig deep and you're like,
Yeah.
well, what's driving this? Like, are they not selling enough product? Are they getting things from a supplier who's expensive? Are they overpaying their stuff? Like all those elements around being curious and diving deep. So that's the first step that I always recommend for people around money. It's
Mm.
like, find what money means to you. Because
Mm.
having cash in the bank, that's just like that's just a basic definition. But
Mm.
for other people, like definition of money could be having an ability to heat up their house without having to worry about the power bill. If you've got family overseas, it could be uh, being able to help a nephew go to sort of like school, like
Mm.
tuition and stuff like that. So it's almost like take a step to think about what an ideal financial state would look like for
Mm.
you, your family as a starting point. Because if you dream of the ideal picture,
Mm.
if that's the first step, and then the second step is looking at where you're at now,
Mm.
and most of the time there'll be a gap.
Yeah.
And then it's that gap that somebody like me comes in, where we're like, okay, if your dream state is to always have $1,000 at the end of your pay cycle because you intend to send it to your family overseas,
Mm.
but actually your current situation, you only have $100.
Mm.
There is a $100 bit in the
Yeah.
so a lot of people will get hung up with, oh gosh, I just have $100, that's it. But if
Mm.
you change your mindset to sort of say, I want to get $1,000, all of a sudden $100 means you're left with 900. So if
Mm.
you get 200, okay, you're now on 700 left. So then it's those incremental gaps. So it's just
Yes.
really picture your dream financial picture and
Yeah.
then think deep about the current stage. So
Yeah.
that's step one.
Yeah. And I guess also another thing that you heard on there was having that, I guess, introspection and conversation, especially if you're in a family unit, that would be a conversation that you're having with your family, because I guess those financials affect that family unit. So how can families actually have healthy conversations about financial boundaries?
Honestly, I think that like people don't realize, like I was listening to this podcast once and it was talking about some of the most important things you can do in life
Mm.
is choose your spouse. A lot of people choose someone because of their looks or their job, or we have similar interests. But like very few people actually talk about where they sit on the money spectrum, because I
So
think
true.
it's just one of those things, right? Where imagine if you've pictured your perfect financial life and you need to have this amount of savings, but then you've got another person who, for them, nailing their financial goals means that they can donate to a charity all the
Mm.
time. Those are very different. One
Mm-hmm.
is about giving and one is
Mm-hmm.
about giving back.
Yeah.
So then those two get married and then they start a family. If there's an extra $500, they're not going to be on the same page from the start.
Exactly. Yeah.
The other one, it'll be like, oh, this is for my piggyback. And the other one's like,
Yeah.
which charity do I want to like
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I think it's honestly one of those where if you're already in the situation, like you've picked your spouse, you can't, well, you can, but hey.
Not ideally, but things happen.
Yeah. So I guess it would be an exercise where each member of the family, so like the mom, the dad, the kids, just do
Yes.
an exercise of what's your dream financial situation? What does, like if money was never a problem to you, what would you buy? Like what would you do? And stuff like that. Because families have those topics when they're thinking about how to spend school holidays.
Mm.
Same thing, where it's like you just understand what money means to each individual in the family,
Mm.
look at where you're at, and really focus on how, as a family unit, you can address the gap, right?
Mm.
Because the thing is not about saying, I am a saver, I'm married to a gifter, and we need to save or we need to gift somebody, but it's about what amount is reasonable for us collectively as a family to still save while still doing things that fill our cup, such as donating to charity or traveling or that kind of stuff. So yeah.
And what would you say would be the, I guess, how young is too young? Or when is it the right time to start sitting the kids down and having these conversations with them? At what point can they actually, I guess, well, attain what you are trying to teach them or discuss with them, but then also contribute to
Yeah.
the conversation and the family goal?
Yeah. I think that like, which is how my younger brother and I were raised. I come from a family of two, got a younger brother. And with how we were raised is that we were individuals and humans
Mm,
that are just young. So
mm,
that whatever they think, whether they're at 3 years old, still has weighting as they would be if they're like 15. Because I
mm.
think, right, where I think some people sort of go like, oh, but this person's a child. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they're a child, but they will understand certain things from their lens and their perspective. So
Mm,
like
yeah.
if 3 years old, you give your kid like $5 and then you give them that autonomy to sort of say, if I've given you $5, I give you this $5 every Friday.
Yeah.
You want to go spend it at school on a Monday, that's it. You're only going to get it on
Yeah.
Friday. Or if you do something extra in the house, I'll add maybe another $2. Like you
Mm,
start sort of like rewards. And if they come to you and they say, I want to buy this toy, you can actually say, oh, you've got $5 and it costs 5.50. Where you're going to get the 50. So I think that's the
yeah.
part where it's actually take the concept of like that example I'm talking about, right? In an adult perspective, it's you work, you get a regular pay amount, you're making decisions on how much you're going to spend on what,
Yeah.
and you've got that delayed gratification. So I
Yeah.
think where people tend to overcomplicate it, but if
Mm,
you actually talk to your kid about it in that context, if you see that your kid sort of says, oh, actually, maybe this week, don't give me that $5. I want it a little bit
yeah.
later. All of a sudden, you are able to have conversations with your kids on things like, we can't go on this holiday, this school holiday, but actually we're saving and then we'll be able to go on it in a couple of months or years or whatever. So I think it really is about parents being vulnerable
Okay.
with the children and then really valuing the perspective of your kids.
Yes,
Because I mean they could give you suggestions you didn't even think about. Yeah.
exactly. That your childhood and your relationship or your parents' relationship with money and bringing you into that influenced your relationship with money as an
Yes.
adult?
100%. It definitely did, right? Because, like when I was probably like 4 years old, we were in Zimbabwe at the time, and then my dad would be going to like South Africa for like work and stuff.
Yeah.
And I would ask mum, I'd be like, oh, where's dad? He's not around and stuff. And she would tell me, she'd be like, oh, he's going to work. He's going to go
Mm,
to work. He's going to make more money for us so that we can, buy this thing that you want. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then couple of years later, when I was probably like 7, and then my parents moved to sort of like the UK for work and stuff. Before they left, we had a conversation about it. They were like,
mm,
we're you've always really wanted to go to this private school. And so for us to be able to like afford you to be able to go there, we've taken on these jobs and we're going. And so
yeah.
parents were leaving. People were shocked why I wasn't crying. I was like, no, 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 it's all good. They're gonna go,
I'm gonna go to the private school.
yeah, I'm gonna go to sort of like private school and stuff. So I think it was that bit of just it was sort of like just embedded in the day to day and
Mm,
wasn't like a discussion that is made to feel awkward and
yeah.
stuff like that. So I think that really did shape how I talk about money and how I feel about money. Because like when I relate to other adults now,
Mm,
it's just a taboo subject.
it
Like
is. Yeah.
they don't want like everyone will talk about things. Yeah, sometimes people talk about things that are way more personal, like doctors' results or that kind of
So
stuff.
true, actually.
But like no one would openly say, I can't actually go out for dinner with you today because my bank account only has like $20.
Yeah, I'd rather make an excuse. Hey, sorry, my daughter's sick.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's the part, right? Where with money, as very few people realize that your habits, your belief system about it actually gets shaped in those formative years.
Mm,
You mirror what you observe.
yeah, that is so true. And I guess it's so true for everything else. So it's crazy that we don't take that same concept when it comes to money. What what do you see as being like the biggest financial, I guess, challenges facing families in New Zealand?
So a lot actually. A lot. So a little bit about my career is that I have also worked in like the housing sort of like sector through like Kaingaura, doing like strategy type stuff. And then I've also done something similar, working in the justice sector at like corrections and stuff. And I think things that people don't realize is that housing is quite it's quite major. And you know, like in New Zealand, like people often feel that I need to have a batch, I need to have like a rental property, I need to have house and all that sort of stuff. So then owning a house is no longer really about it being a basic necessity.
Mm,
Everyone, it's kind of like tied to people's worth and value as
mm,
individuals. So then I think that one of the biggest challenges is that for people to be able to afford what is deemed as you've made it, cost of living doesn't
yes.
align. Like, you
Yeah.
know, doesn't align with how the value of the houses at the moment. Like, you know, a couple of years ago in New Zealand, generally, which terrifies me, is that somebody who earns $100,000 is going to get a house that costs them $1 million, but this
Mm,
doesn't factor in like interest rates, it doesn't factor in rates, it doesn't factor in like insurance, repairs, maintenance, like it doesn't. So then you've got this society where people are paying, like essentially with that example, they have to work for 10 years without paying tax, without getting paid, literally like everything they make goes,
exactly.
which is actually ridiculous
Mm,
because look at like other countries, you know, like your housing costs are generally maybe like 55 times, you
yes.
know, 5 times your annual salary. So it's that inability to actually afford a home and then the domino effect of what that does to children, right? Like if
Mm,
a good home, it could be leaky, it could be unhealthy,
mm-hmm,
drives illnesses, which
mm,
it's like the health system. And
mm,
also like, you know, maybe for a certain individual, renting might be the most sensible.
mm,
So I think the biggest challenge for people in New Zealand is that probably very few of us take stock on what a financially wealthy life looks like. And so you always feel like you're left behind and
mm.
you're probably doing the best that you can and
Yeah.
not could be reasonable, right? Like, I mean, if you're
Yeah.
talking about families that have migrated from overseas, they've
Mm,
spent thousands of dollars already traveling to move,
yes.
to find
Yes.
live and stuff like that. So then when they come here and then they see that everybody is a homeowner, they feel like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I can't afford a house. And it's like, no, no, no. The amount that you could have used for a deposit for a home, you made the decision to
To
sort of
move
like,
over. Yeah.
but I think if you've just created that landscape of what being well from a financial perspective means for you and your family, it just minimizes some of the pressures
Yeah.
that different individuals have.
Yeah. Yeah. That is actually so true. I guess I can definitely relate because again, you want to maintain the same lifestyle you had when you were I'm from South Africa, so when you're in South Africa then you were a homeowner and then you come here and things are different and it's taking longer. And like you say, um there's that, I guess, pressure from society that, hey, look, in order for you to have made it, you need to live in this type of home, I guess, or own this type of home in this area. So then there's all those social pressures. So, but then, and that leads me to the next question, um, in terms of where can people get access to financial advice and support that's culturally aware, particularly people who've migrated to New Zealand?
From Money Saving Move. Just putting in a plug there. You can come to
Putting it
us.
out there.
You can come to us. But yeah, I think honestly, like there's so many different tools out there that you can utilize. But for all of them to work, you need to take the time to. I won't say this. I'll keep saying this. Everybody needs to take stock of what a dream life looks like. Because the thing is, with all the tools you get online, like if you go on, there's a website called Sorted. So if you go on that one, it's got budgeting templates, like it's got like apps you can download where if you've got saving goals, you can plug in your saving goal, the amount, you can plug in like the duration, whether you want to do it in like 5 years or 3 months, and then it kind of like tells you, and you can do it the same for paying down your debt and stuff like that. But I think that for people that are sort of like migrating, it's a matter of taking the tool and then applying it to your concept, to like your reality. Because my tool, for example, might have I spend heaps of money going shopping and etc. But then another person's reality is that they're sending money back home.
Yeah,
So some of the tools that you find might not have that as an expense line item. So it's really just taking whatever the budgeting template
mm,
and where it says things like internet, insurance, you say holiday, if holiday is a key thing, or you change the rates one to sort of say sending money back home. Like you really, because that's one thing I'm quite big on.
yeah,
I a budget doesn't need to be online. It can be a pen and paper
yeah,
type thing. Actually, your ability to execute
yeah,
what it is that you've done, drafted and stuff like that, that really matters. And
yeah.
then it's like it's kind of like one you have to realize that when you are in the Western world, um, which I watched in another podcast, um, no one is out to save you, which is
Yes,
something that a lot of ethnic people might struggle with because when you're back home, there's a sense of community that, like, this family can support this family and they can
yes.
support this
That
family.
village.
Yeah, so there's that village mindset, right?
Yeah.
Whereas yeah, you don't have that village. So then you have to figure out how to save to compensate for the lack of that village. So that's the part where it's really the application of each of the tools that I think
Yeah,
is quite key, which is why I think
yeah,
like sessions like this, right, are quite useful because we bring best practice textbook guidance, but it really just needs to be tailored to
yeah.
the
To
audience.
individuals, yeah. You mentioned budgeting here, and I know that we'll probably need like a 2 hour session to tackle budgeting. But what are some quick tips that you can share, particularly in the climate that we are in the financial climate that we are in? I think not only New Zealand but worldwide. What quick tips could you give about budgeting in this climate?
So first one is a lot of times people want to cut expenses, but I think you need to be creative about increasing your income. So, as have a job and think of other side things that you can do, especially nowadays where job cuts are happening sort of like all the
Mm-hmm,
time. And
mm-hmm,
then putting some money aside, there's models that say you need to have 3 months, 2 months, or whatever, just start to put at least 10%
mm-hmm.
of what you make all the time into your emergency sort of like fund and limiting the use of things like afterpay because that like if you lose your job you won't be able to pay for things like
Yes, yes,
afterpay. And another one which is quite key, which I don't think a lot of people do, is if you go online and you sort of put in your address and your power provider, you can
yeah,
actually see what competitors are
yeah,
offering. So it's actually been quite savvy around those things
yeah,
where you look for the bargains.
yeah. Bargain
Yeah,
queen.
yeah,
This is the time to be a bargain queen.
yeah,
Okay.
bargain, literally bargain, and also make the budget visible to someone else so they can be your
Mm.
accountability.
Hold you
Um,
accountable. I like that. You mentioned Afterpay. Okay, so I think when I first came to New Zealand, because in South Africa, we back when I came at least, we didn't have Afterpay. So when I came here, I was like, you mean like I can take it now and pay it later? What do you mean? So what is your advice on people avoiding, I guess, debt and credit traps? What advice would you share?
So, lived experience here. Um, with debt, there is good and bad debt, right? Whereas a lot of people think having debt is bad, but it's not. It's the kind of debt you have and what you're using it for that's bad.
Mhm.
So if we kind of like break it down into bits, is that if you've got a credit card of let's say $10,000, your goal should be to pay it off every month so that you don't get charged interest. Because sometimes the interest is like 33% or like 20% or whatever. So like if you don't fully pay it off at the end of the month, you're going to be sort of like screwed.
Mhm.
So a bank might give you a credit card for 10,000 unless you can't, unless you can pay it off in 4 weeks, you probably afford $1,000 credit card. Like
Mhm.
I have a credit card because I
Mhm.
know swipe it, like paying repaying it is a breeze. Like I don't even think about it. So
Yeah.
then that first thing with credit cards, it's just people don't understand how to use a credit card. So
Mhm.
actually, the terms of your credit card, with some credit cards, they sort of say if you swipe for above a certain amount, like $250 or whatever, it is 6 months interest free.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of like credit card you want to have.
Yeah.
So you already do those transactions where instead of having to pay for it in the month, you pay for it in 6 months. So
Mhm.
that's an example with like credit cards, right?
Yeah.
And if I think of other things like, which is always a buffer that people should always tell themselves is that if it's easy for you to get the debt, it's likely bad for you.
That's a good one. So if it's easy for you to get the date, it's likely bad.
Yeah,
Okay.
because that's good for you, like a mortgage through like the big banks, as opposed to like subsidiary banks and stuff like that, they will check your affordability. They will check, like your subscriptions, your expenditure
Mhm.
will go to town doing the checks.
Mhm.
When you, on the flip side, like payday lenders that are sort of like giving you quick cash, overnight. So
Mm.
that's just the catch, where if you hire money from someone very quickly, chances are
Yeah.
something will kick you off guard. And for a lot of people, it's not the getting the debt, but it's your ability to service the debt
Well.
that's a problem. So like
Mhm.
can't, with people when people use Afterpay, they'll
Yeah.
think of it as, oh, it's I've made a transaction of $100. It's four equal payments, 25, 25, 25, 25. People start to think of it as a $25 purchase, and it's like, no,
Yes. Yeah.
100.
Yeah, that is so true.
And then if you're good at using Afterpay, you're fine. But when I was so big on Afterpay a couple of years ago, I would make lots of small little purchases
Yeah.
of $100 and $100 there, $200 there. And then my salary would come in and legit, like Afterpay would take half of it.
Mm.
It just adds up. And
Yeah.
the time people have certain like spending habits. So then your quarter payments all fall in the same.
Yes. Yeah.
And you literally don't, it just becomes like a cycle. So I think
Yes.
that the debt is actually list everything you owe and think about which one was super easy to get. That was
Mm-hmm.
bad for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you could probably try to cut it because with some of those debts, right, a lot of people don't take the time to actually read the contract and read the terms.
Yes. Yeah.
Will sort of say if you're using some of these sites that lend you money, if they attempt to pay and you don't have money in your bank account and it's a default, it triggers uh, the credit companies, and then that can hit your credit rating. Whereas,
Yes.
like, I'm not like if you're dealing with like a better provider, like a bank or whatever, and then you default on like your mortgage, they will attempt to work with you to resolve it. So then that's the other thing as well, where it's a lot
Mm.
that people get in is you go like, oh, my bank is not giving me this loan. Oh, I'm just gonna go for this one where I can just do click. I'll know by tomorrow. The thing
Yes.
is, you better make sure you have read the terms and conditions and
Mm.
be paying it as much as you can because what affects people a lot is the lack of understanding of what they've signed up to. Because if people actually, before you sort of sign, they say, give this to a lawyer, give this to an accountant, like just, gosh, I don't know, plug it into ChatGPT or something and say, tell me the pros and cons and etc. And then
Yeah.
you start to understand what that,
Yeah.
like if you've got goals, like when we were like, so this will be an example that will show you the difference between having good debt and bad debt, is that when Lloyd and I were probably like 21 years old, we went to a financial advisor because wanted to buy like a house and stuff like that. And then the financial advisor looked at both our bank statements. Oh my God, it was so bad because you're coming fresh out of uni, you've got student loan, you've got all these credit cards, like at university in New Zealand, you just bombarded with debt and you
Mm.
have grasped like what it means and stuff like.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were looking for a house at the time, the mortgage broker we worked with, they literally could give us a house of maybe like 300,000, like an apartment, and it was like a subsidiary of a main bank, not even like the main bank, because the
Mm.
main bank would not talk to the people we were
Yeah.
because we just owed so much. And it's like
Yeah.
owing things like, like you've got a student loan, you've got ASB credit card, ANZ credit card, and all your credit cards are maxed out. And now if you add things like Afterpay and all that stuff, it balloons up because the other
Mm.
in mortgage companies or anyone is looking at your debt, they
Yeah.
don't, oh, you've got a $5,000 credit card, but you've only spent two and a half, so technically you have two and a half. It's actually the whole amount that they look at.
Yes.
So like
Yeah.
think that, oh, if I've got a credit card and I haven't used it and it's $5,000, I have $5,000 cash. You actually don't. You have $5,000 in debt whether or not you've used it. It's your like ability to use it that screws you when you're getting assessed. So
Yeah.
when we started understanding that, we started paying down all the debts, like paying all the credit cards, putting in money towards like student loan and stuff like that. And literally, kid you not, 2 years later, we went back to try do it again, and
Yeah.
all main banks were able to give us something.
Wow.
They were willing to give us like pre-approvals and stuff. So then that's the
Yeah.
part we don't realize that just having bad debt
Yeah.
screws you over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Understand that. So it pretty much is understand the terms of what you signed up to,
Mm-hmm.
and he, if they didn't grill you to get that money,
Yeah.
rude.
Yeah. Almost like reminds me of that analogy, like easy come, easy go. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
pretty much. So that's
pretty much, yeah. That
yeah.
is. Thank you so much. Honestly, we're about to wrap up where I'd like you to share one or two things that you think is important to get out there. And we definitely need to get you back. There's just so many components of the things that you mentioned that I would like to ask more questions
We're
on,
like
like journey to home ownership, budgeting. There's so much in there. So we'll definitely have a part two or three.
oh, awesome.
Where can people find you firstly? How can people get in touch with you?
Great. So will be www.moneysavvymove.co.nz, and on there we'll be offering like sort of like explaining the services that we provide. So we work
Yeah.
with like people looking for accounting stuff, as well as people looking for like consulting things. But one key thing with us is that we're sort of like an educational hub, because at the end
Yes.
of the day, we just think that money to be simple and
Yes.
practical. So with a lot of the solutions we offer, if you're someone who wants to be better with money, if you're somebody starting up a business, if you're already a business and you just want to improve your profitability and stuff like that. That's kind of the key stuff we'll be doing. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on there as well. And you can also find us on Instagram.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll put all the links in the caption to make it easier for people to find you. So what is that one last or two piece of advice that you have for us all?
Cool. So it's hard to find one. I think I'll give you two. First one is that budgeting is the first step. You know,
Mm,
amazing plan, but it's actually executing it that's
yeah.
important. You don't need a tool, you just need to have a tracker that you live by.
Mm,
And the second one is that with a lot of things happening, people losing their jobs, like cost of living going up, and
mm,
one thing that is worth exploring for each individual is around insurance, because sometimes you might not be able to save for a rainy day, but actually, if you're insured in case you've got like emergencies and stuff like that, that is also something that can future-proof you,
mm,
because might not might not be what you can do. So,
mm.
two things: budget and explore having insurance as a safety blanket.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I said it earlier, you make money matters so simple and easy and less intimidating. So I think that's a talent. So thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, we will be bringing you more of these amazing series with different guests. Before I go, massive shout out to the New Plymouth District Council and Ministry of Ethnic Communities for enabling us to make this happen. See you next week.